Welcome. Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Matos for inviting me to present today on this course. I feel very honoured to be able to share a few of my thoughts on military diplomacy. My name is Alex Seagar and I am a member of the Australian Defence Force. I've been with the Australian Army for 7.5 years as a military legal officer. And as a military legal officer, it is my job to advise on the law and policy frameworks that apply to our domestic activities as a military force and our activities overseas if we're doing exercises or operations. And I think one of the key things to understanding military diplomacy is to appreciate what it is to be a member of a defence force. It is a unique job. We spend most of our time training and preparing for an event that may actually never occur. And that's this idea that we may be going to war. And it's a unique job in that there's probably no other job like it where you spend most of your daytime preparing for a possibility that may never actually arise. And so what we do in our day job is a lot of preparation and a lot of activity for that scenario. And that's critical to keeping us professional as a professional fighting force, but also critical to understanding how it is that we can go into these environments, say as a coalition, and do that job effectively. So what we do in our training is we prepare for and train the same way we would fight, and that is we train in a collaborative fashion. So in the military, this is called the concept of interoperability, and it's the idea that we can work with other forces, with other nations side by side for a shared common interest or common goal. And so in our training, we invite our friends, our allies, other partner forces, maybe even countries with a geographical interest to come and participate on our exercises and activities and train together to build that interoperability. And we do that almost on a daily basis. And it is unique in that experience because there's not many other jobs in the world where you spend a lot of time preparing for something that may never actually happen. And this interoperability is really important because it's applicable across the broad spectrum of conflict scenarios that can arise. So on one hand, you've got peacekeeping and peace building, and all the way through to offensive operations or operations in self-defense. And interoperability is key across that entire spectrum. It's going to be rare in these times that a fighting force would face a conflict by themselves. It's normally a collaborative effort in the form of a coalition or something similar. And so it's really important that if we do get to that situation where the hostilities are at the threshold of an armed conflict, that we can come together with like-minded partner forces and collaborate to overcome that enemy force or defeat whatever it is on the other side that needs to be conquered. And so for me, that all came together quite clearly when I deployed to Iraq as an embedded legal officer in 2019. I was positioned with the coalition headquarters in Baghdad, which was the coalition effort to defeat Daesh in Iraq and Syria. And for me, that was a wonderful experience because part of my desire to be in the military in the first place was for the adventures and the travel that you get to have, which there is a lot of. But for me, it was the pinnacle of my career because it was bringing together all of the training, all of that collaboration, all of that interoperability that we'd prepared for into actual real life, real world operations. And it was a really unique experience to work alongside many other nations for this common goal. So my boss was American, I had Canadian colleagues, I had British colleagues, I had colleagues from New Zealand, France, many other places in Europe, and of course Iraqi colleagues as well. And it was an incredible experience to work alongside these many, many different nations with a broad range of backgrounds and experiences, and do so in such a collaborative fashion and successfully, which could not have been done without that training and preparedness that we go through beforehand. And so the key thing that for me that arises out of all of that training and interoperability are the networks that form. And those networks are vital because they're the networks that we can rely upon in that public diplomacy framework more generally, should we ever need to have those conversations. So quite often you'll see that play out with the idea of strategic leadership engagement. So you might have senior members of the Australian Defence Force talking to, say, senior members of the Canadian Defence Force at that strategic level and engaging in those key leadership engagements and keeping our forces talking to one another fluidly and openly. And that's obviously enabled many times by some of the other frameworks that we have. So for instance, the Five Eyes community or the NATO community, which are designed to be able to share information back and forth much more fluidly and set up parameters for how we can operate together on a variety of activities. So for me, the key thing with military diplomacy are those networks and those bonds that form. And I think that's really important to understanding, because I can go anywhere in the world now and there is bound to be somebody that I know from my time in the military that I can catch up with, have a coffee with, say hello to, even ask if they want to be involved in a project or if they've got thoughts on a particular complex scenario that's playing out around the world. And I think that's a really important thing when it comes to public diplomacy, because it takes all types of diplomacy to achieve a resolution to a situation. And military diplomacy is just one branch of that. But it's also a great way to expose a country to another country in terms of the cultural, social, and other aspects of that country as well. I've been on exercises both domestically within Australia and overseas in places like the Republic of Korea and here in Canada. And I could never tell you anything much about the military courses that I've been on, but I can tell you a lot about the culture in those places. And that's really important, because that military experience is also about forming other connections and networks that draw in all of these cultural experiences together. And those are networks that we can rely upon in the future should we ever need to. So thank you very much for listening to me. If you have any questions, I'm sure Dr. Matos would be happy to answer them. I know he has his own personal experience in the forces, so I'll hand it over to him to answer any questions. Thank you.